I would like to welcome you to this inaugural episode of CAREER4SEA Talks. And in this episode, we have a number of guests to discuss the post-COVID era, working and shipping in the post-COVID era, what will be the same and what will change. So what we have so far, the pandemic it may be a black swan event, it may not be a black swan event, but has radically changed our lives and how everyone is living at the moment. And I think the majority of our viewers and the whole industry wishes to have some sort of coming back to normal. We'll see how this new normal will be, but we know that the post-COVID era will not be the same. So with the vaccines and the vaccination programs going on across the globe, at some point we feel that the whole shipping community and the civilization will go back, but the pandemic won't be over anytime soon. It will take many months to restore the full operations of all of us. So we would like to discuss the impact of this pandemic to shipping. We would like to discuss how the pandemic will affect the workplace ashore and on board, mainly focusing on board today, what the shipping post-pandemic will look like, what the new skills for people would be to invest in, and of course, the acceptance of the remote training and emerging place in the workplace. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests. We have in this talk, Iris Baguilat. Iris is the president of Döhle Seafront Crew in Manila. We have Gisa Paredes. Gisa is the chief operating officer of WellAtSea. And Captain John Dolan. John is the deputy director of loss prevention for the Standard Club. I would like to thank you all very much. And I would like to start this discussion with how shipping has reacted to the pandemic. I would like to ask, in your view, has shipping been resilient? Have we responded to the pandemic effectively? What do you think so far? Iris.
So I start from the crewing side. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were one of the first to flag the virus. Since we are in Asia, we were more proximate to what was happening. And then we started to close down. You are aware of that. Also in Manila, we held remote offices. We had a lot of planning, emergency planning, backup, in case of business failure. Then we shifted to work from home. We were forced to digitize all our processes, close our offices. No crew was coming in to process documents. And this is a day-to-day operation, especially in Manila. We are filled with seafarers day in and out. Both our applicants and also our crew that have been hired already. When lockdown eased up, the office started to work on rotation. So someone worked from home while others in the office were following the most stringent of physical distancing. It is now our normal. I don't know in Europe, I am hearing otherwise, but here in the office, I'm just not doing it because I'm alone here in my room. But we always have a mask and a face shield. So it's a double thing. So you have a mask, a face shield at the same time. I understand this is not very common there, but this is a common sight here. And all our staff who are here every day are on it. And then the manning agencies have been allowed by Philippine government to operate at 100% capacity since a few months back. So we are on business as usual. We're still following the most stringent of physical distancing protocols. The pandemic has become our biggest technological disruptor, and it has accelerated all our plans for our strategic plans. So we all shifted to digital technology, including using different social media platforms to connect with our customers, the seafarers, and the principals. So I don't know how familiar with Manila. So gone are the days that recruitment, which is not limited to us, goes to the seafarer-filled streets of Calao. It's a park in Manila where all the seafarers are gathering together informally for some reason, and then recruitment goes there. It is no longer that way. And on social events and fora such as this, we are used to connect with stakeholders in the industry in situs. But then that has now transformed as we are doing now. Our pre-joining briefing and training are done digitally also to avoid physical contact and keep our seafarers as much as possible at the safest while preparing their requirements. One, I think, of the most vital development that we saw or we experienced or we are forerunners is the industry collaborative effort. There is now intense collaboration in the industry to facilitate such crew change. A foremost example is the International Transport Workers Federation, or ITF, and the International Maritime Employers Council IMEC quarantine facility in Manila, and I am part of that working group. We worked very hard on it, beginning second quarter, I think, of last year or third quarter. Our work started to create processes and system for a crew change, and we established a quarantine facility in Manila. Thankfully, to date, the Singapore Shipping Tripartite Alliance Resilience (SG Star) Fund accredited as Crew Safe the holding facility of ITF IMEC St. Giles, Makati. It means that the process and the hotel has met the requirements for proper and tight practices for a higher level of confidence and quality control checks into crew change processes such as quarantine holding, medical and swabbing facilities of AMUSUP. Incidentally, AMUSUP is key to this project as the secretariat for the facility. Our developing and joining this undertaking, the ITF IMEC quarantine facility, meant that we did away with a do-it-yourself process. In the past, we were having our own seafarers, we would book our own hotels, hold them, oversee that remotely. But then we shifted by joining this facility, and I campaigned heavily to our different ship owner clients to join, to send their crew to the facility, and to our colleagues in the industry to also hold their seafarers in the ITF IMEC St. Giles holding facility, as I am confident of the process and of the risk reduction. So in John's term, it's loss prevention. And we see now intense collaboration with government, with our industry colleagues. For example, also last year, we could not survive our daily operation without this chat group of a group of manning agencies. And as an offshoot to that, we established a manning association composed, it's called Alma Maritime Group. It is composing of 50 plus manning agencies with the big names, handling 110,000 Filipino seafarers together. We have daily ongoing dialogue with different government agencies, with the Red Cross, for example, with whom we have a MOA, and all the different stakeholders. And it has become our day-to-day routine. This is the only way we could support our seafarers on board, operationally, and and for the people on board, they have taken the most hit. We, as an agency, will learn to transform, adapt ourselves to take care of them, and at the same time, we also saw how we have to be experts of operational. While we are operating daily, we also have experts of regulations every day because the changes are happening by the hour. So we have to understand what policies are changing in the different ports in our own jurisdiction. We have to adapt immediately because that will be a make or break of our crew change. And then at the same time, we have to be continuously dialoguing with our people on board, especially during the height of the lockdown. I was holding on board town halls to explain to them,
Okay.
because some of them are yes, go ahead. Sorry. Some are,
let's put a stop there. We'll come back. We'll come back to
yeah.
the what is going on and the perception. Let's hear from John. John, pros and cons for you. What we have learned so far from the pandemic, as far as the response of our industry is concerned. What do you
Well, Iris, thank you, Apostolos and Iris. Well done. That's a really good exposition of the situation.
think?
Um, Darwin talked about, survival of the fittest, but in fact, it is the person or the individual or the entity that is the most adaptable that survives, and that's what the industry is doing right now. I mean, fundamentally, just a brief explanation of what we did at the PNI Club in March. This came at us very, very quickly. Everybody in the office then went to home working, and we now are all well adapted. Here we are 9 months later, 10 months later, having adapted to technology to allow us to continue to service the members and all that. So that resilience has happened ashore. However, on board ship, of course, the show goes on, and ships keep trading because there's essential service, but it is very, very difficult to even understand the challenges the mariners actually face on board ships right now. Extended tours, constant stress and anxiety, uh, restricted access to and from the ships, constant lack of information and updated information, sometimes much fake information on board ship. So the mariners are doing an extraordinary job. And this is the word that we receive from our surveyors who do manage to get on board ships, that seafarers, despite all the challenges, have adapted and are continuing to adapt to this new reality, disastrous as it actually is, and the well-being challenges that arise from it. But that's where we are right now.
Okay. Gisa, your views, pros and cons of the response of the industry?
Yeah, well, I think that this pandemic in general has really brought to light, crew welfare and the importance of mental health in the industry. We've had many discussions around this previously. We've had many gatherings, and we've tried to highlight mental health even before the pandemic. But when this happened, it was as if we could no longer hide from it. The reality is there. And another thing is that while the crew are out there and are experiencing a lot of challenges around themselves, we too, on land or on shore, are experiencing the same, because there is such a huge, how do you say this, uncertainty around this situation. And uncertainty in itself, as Iris highlighted earlier, was, every day things change. And how do we keep up with that when on the management side, on the crewing side, you're trying to help the men, you're trying to get them home, you're also trying to get them on board, but things change immediately. And that can be very, very taxing for people on shore, and as well for the men on board, because their questions are, when do I go home? When does this end? When is everything going to get better? And I think we're all asking the same question. And in this uncertainty, mental health and concerns around, isolation, because it's not just isolation on ships, we're also isolating here on shore. When are we going to see people again? How are we going to face this? What is the uncertainty of, connecting, of being in large groups again, or even the fact that will we feel safe? Because again, there are so many restrictions around COVID. Will we ever feel safe in those settings again? And are we ready for that? So it is highlighting a health factor, not just the physical state that we need to take care of, but also the mental aspect of preparing for it, and the emotional state of persons.
Yeah, yeah. I fully agree. A friend of mine, an American friend of mine, stated that we had a discussion last week, and he reminded me, for those who visited the US after the 9/11, immediately after the 9/11, they were thinking back at that time, the shock was substantial. I mean, it was something that no one had predicted, that something like that would happen. And they were thinking that the travel to the US will stop, that life will stop, but inevitably, after a few months and a few years, things took up. I mean, fully understand what you're saying. We feel now that it may be the end of the life as we know it. I fully agree, however, and I hear a lot of people sharing these thoughts. I would like to also ask, what are your thoughts with those? I fully understand, and I think it's discussed a lot with the mental health issues of those traveling on board ships. How about the guys who are staying ashore? These guys have been more or less restricted within their home spaces, and they have been robbed of their career, actually. Many of these people cannot travel, they cannot go on board, and they have a career. What are your views about these people, Iris?
Are you talking about seafarers who are unable to go on? Yes, unfortunately, yes. Now we have a number of those, and it has been difficult at the beginning. It became a talking point to those on board because they were really very eager to get off, blaming everybody else. And I would conduct town hall meetings with them on board. And they would show me their luggages, so it's already ready, so I will get off. Or you said that the schedule is tomorrow, but then you're telling us that it's no longer feasible, and I have to explain at the beginning that while you are suffering, your colleagues at shore waiting to replace you are actually now asking for cash aid. That was the initial calls that we made. I was also saying that publicly to really bring cash aid to those who are waiting. We were facilitating their requests from government because they were really suffering tremendously. They were unemployed. There is no income coming in. They were in lockdown, and we still see that now. We have quite a number of our seafarers who were tested to be positive. It's community transmitted COVID. They are asymptomatic, but then they have to wait for some time to be cleared. And that also derails or delays their potential earning. That continues to happen. We are a bit concerned as well with the mutating virus because this will impact once more the travel flow, and that is a concern. But that is true. That is true, especially where in our country where we are not a social state, so there is not a lot of help from government for
Yeah.
unemployment.
Yeah, I think the same applies to other countries as well. It's not only Philippines. The same applies to many EU countries as well, and
True,
elsewhere.
true,
So
true.
it's more or less the same. Anyway, I would like to. My next question would be: I would like to discuss what will be the same and what will change. What will the pandemic change in terms of shipping? I think we all agree that travel at some point will be restored. At some point, I don't want to have a crystal ball. It will take months or years, but traveling will be restored at some point. What do you think it will change? Because Gisa mentioned that it may be not the same post-pandemic. I would like to start with John. John, what do you think will change with this pandemic in the way that we conduct business in shipping?
Um, I think it's actually quite difficult to be sure of what the next steps are because the impacts are still being measured on a day-to-day basis. I think uh, travel, of course, will resume. Ships will continue. There is no economic substitute for ships, so bulk shipping will continue. Whether there'll be as many crew on board, whether there'll be greater use of technology and sophisticated controls from maybe ashore, semi-autonomous vessels, all could be potential responses to the pandemic. For sure, there'll be changes in training, in crew training, I think, because many of the people on board will require additional training just simply to cope with the extended periods of service on board and the shocks arising from it. If certainly for those who've been delayed for way beyond their contracts. The same will apply to the people who've been retained or kept ashore for extended periods. There will really be some training required, I think, when they get back on board ship, just to help them adjust and adapt again to being back on board ship. So there are structural, almost systemic issues built up into ship operations that will need to be resolved. Um, I think we can come on to discuss training and that later on, but I think those will be the principal things. As I say, ships will continue, crews will be still required, but the nature of the crew, the trainings of the crew, protocols towards operating ships, access to ships, all of those could potentially change. But right now, it seems to me too early to be able to assert categorically that these will be the changes in the future. Too early, I believe.
Yeah, I understand your view. I'm not saying we can predict now. I mean, what the point is, what do we see? But I think many insiders in the industry have accepted that the pandemic has acted as a technology accelerator, actually.
Yes, I do agree with that. I do, and even now, us having this conversation and this way of doing business would have been unthinkable even 10 months ago, 11 months ago. So already we're adapting to a new normal, and the same would apply in a shipboard environment. I'm quite sure there is far more communications going between ship and shore. There's still much more to be done there, but right now it is more on the communications to the crew and all that. But you can only imagine, it doesn't take much of imagination to see where control engineering now can come on top of this. Greater control of the plant, greater control of the machinery, greater control of the operation. So there is going to be a digitalization acceleration, I'm sure, in ship operations and management in the future. But as for a timeline, that is difficult right now to ascertain.
Fully agree, fully agree. The timeline cannot be predicted. Gisa, your views. What do you think?
Sorry, the question was again, what's going to change?
What do you think it will change? What the pandemic will change? Maybe I'm just saying maybe companies, I mean, ship operators will be forced to change the terms of contract, and maybe they are forced to not change, for example, crew too often, maybe every 3 months or something. So I'm just saying maybe. I'm just saying we've seen that happening. What do you think this pandemic will change in the way we conduct business in shipping?
Well, from my perspective, and I said this last November, I really see the future of health changing. We already know that there's a shortage of mental health professionals and doctors around the world. I'm a mental health professional myself, and in the Philippines, there's about 98,000 people to one mental health professional. And that's just, with the demand of mental health needs in the Philippines, we know for a fact that it cannot be met. So the future of health needs to change. And one way that can happen is to bring, to be able to empower the individual to take control or to have some sort of self-awareness and self-responsibility around their health. And that in itself is also, a system. And the health system right now is a message that we're giving people is that we need to depend on an expert to tell you everything. But I think that in the near future, one good thing that could happen out of this is also being able to give back the power to the patient. And I don't mean that in a sense of self-diagnosis. I mean that in a sense of self-responsibility, self-awareness, taking action steps, more prevention models come into play and helping them understand how this all works. Because this pandemic also showed us that, access to care was no joke. And I think that it's not just true for the ships. Also on shore, access to care is difficult these days. If anything happens to us, we have to go to the emergency room. Sometimes they put you in the COVID ward. And that's scary. So nobody wants to go to the hospital. So how can we now use technology? How can we move that faster so that people can get the care, can also live in a more preventive model and take care of their health, physically and mentally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Iris, what do you think?
I agree. Yes, I agree with John on the automation of processes as well as the communication. Before we used to travel the ends of the earth to see our clients now, or we pick up the phone, but very little video conferencing. But now we know that it's easier doing it this way. I also agree with Gisa. For example, in the Döhle vessels, we have the Break the Silence campaign from beginning of last year, first quarter, on mental health. It is now a real conversation. We have provided a helpline to our seafarers to talk about certain concerns in a confidential way, where we as employers wouldn't even know that they have accessed the hotline. Uh, if they have issues about problems and difficulties, that they have a resource on board. In that I agree. I also see that we will be more collaborative. Hopefully that stays. Now there's strong cooperation within the industry. I mean, imagine you have IMEC and ITF working hand in hand, and the union and the employers, very strongly just to overcome this. Among us, manning agencies or crewing companies, we were traditional competitors, but in order for us to survive, we have to cling on to each other's knowledge or experiences just so to avoid a similar problem. We are seeing that this will stick on, and also closer collaboration with different governments. It is not as we have hoped or as fast as we wanted it to be, especially with the recognition of our seafarers as key workers. But then there is that emerging understanding that there is an industry, that there's a quiet workers, these seafarers who are really moving the world, but they are not being seen or heard or recognized. Hopefully, though, what I really aim for is that there is more mainstream understanding of seafaring. This is still not the same as aviation. With the pandemic, you see all the salutes to the frontliners, and we are not in the painting. The seafarers are not there or in the salute. It's only the maritime people doing that. Hopefully, we gain a better way of showing how critical the seafarers are as key workers. That still is something to be achieved.
There's a lot of work because saying something is one thing, doing something about it, that's another thing. And I think that the whole industry has to work harder towards that end with a number of issues. And I think it's nice to circulate these. I'm not saying it's wrong in any way. I'm just saying it's good. But I'm saying it doesn't by any chance takes the responsibility out of the people who have to do something about it.
Sure, sure.
I would like to ask something to provoke you. A discussion I had a couple of weeks ago. I, at some point, raised an argument. What would have happened if this crisis was taking place in the early 90s? That's a very provoking question. What would have happened if this crisis have taken care in the early 90s? I mean, taking place in the early 90s. Imagine we don't have video conferencing. The technology on board ships is, ancient. Back at that time, there was no technology. We will be totally isolated. Imagine. And at some point, I fully agree that we have been extremely resilient as an industry and we have adapted very fast, yes, but I think we can do more. I'm one of those who think we can do more.
Yeah.
We can do more. Because if this have happened in the early 90s, imagine, I mean, nothing could be, I mean, we have the tools in these days. We have the tools, we have the technology.
Yeah.
And we can make things work. And it's any of you would like to comment on what would have happened in the early 90s? Yes, John, yes.
Despite the fact that I'm only 21 years old, so I really don't remember what happened in the 90s. But I fully agree with your comment there, Apostolos. In fact, thinking about it, it wouldn't be very difficult to imagine an almost apocalyptic outcome insofar as ships being stranded, crews being stranded in very difficult environments and the inability of countries and administrations to share information in a timely way in order to keep the system going. So I could well imagine, but I don't think you even have to go back to the 90s for that. Even a few years ago, could possibly have been that situation as well. So in some respects, despite all the privation, all the challenges, we have been relatively lucky. Now, it's a terrible thing to say in the context of the millions of people that have died around the world, and that is absolutely a dreadful, dreadful indictment of the world that we live in. But it could easily, I think, have been far, far worse indeed.
Yeah. I would like to also ask a very specific question. Do you think that this crisis will help attract or maybe have people thinking of moving away from taking a career on board ships? What do you think? Do you think that this crisis will have an impact of either attracting or maybe taking away seafarers
Yeah.
ships? What do you think,
I,
John?
okay, from my side, Apostolos, I do think that is the case. There is a great risk. Not only were we, prior to the pandemic, in a very delicate balance in terms of supply and demand of manpower, but now having all the challenges associated with a pandemic, all of the extended voyages, all of the stress and anxiety on board ship, um, the well-being challenges that in fact were there long before the pandemic arrived, but which have been accelerated in the current climate. All of those are risk factors to securing the kind of talent the industry needs in the future. So yes, I can see difficulties in maintaining the supply. And indeed, I could see people who have been at sea or been really challenged in on board a ship during this period deciding that, okay, I've done my time, I'm going to look for a job ashore. So yes, I can see challenges, serious challenges arising from those issues, that concern. And therefore, it doesn't take much imagination to say that people being attracted to the industry will also have similar doubts because they will see and hear and feel these kind of negative vibes coming from the industry itself. So I think that it's incumbent upon the industry to really work hard now to sell the benefits of a career at sea. I also think that the video, for example, which was published last week by BIMCO, if you haven't seen it, it is a super exposition of the value and role and importance of shipping, and that's a message that we really have to work hard at promoting to remove what Ira said, the fact that we do have a silent industry, that a relatively silent industry that provides a key function, a critical function to the well-being of the world, and yet largely unrecognized and unappreciated.
Yeah. That could be a topic of another discussion. I mean, it's not only silent, it's also invisible, the industry.
Well said. True.
I think that something is changing slowly, but something is changing. I see larger operators, specifically in excess of 100 ships, something like that, that they have an enormous commercial footprint in the industry. They are taking on board many more professionals who are working with, I would say, on the ESG, I would say, let's say, part of business, but they are taking on board professionals who can talk about what they do over there in the public.
Yes.
So we need more. I fully agree with the latest video. It's by far the best example of collaborative effort we've seen, but it will take more. But I fully agree on that sense. Gisa, your views of would be this pandemic able to attract or maybe repel people from going on board ships? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I actually saw Miss Iris kind of nodding to agreeing that it could attract people and also, perhaps moving her head. But what I think is that, well, one, burnout is real. Things like post-traumatic stress disorder are real as well. And we have to be ready for that. We already know some seafarers that are not willing to go back because of their experience. But we also know that seafaring, there's what I observe in seafarers is that at the end of the day, they still really love what they do. And perhaps those that are experiencing difficulty right now may take some time to recover, but there will also be those that are in fact interested, that are willing to go for the challenge, that have stronger characters and are willing to do this, that will come back and help the industry. And they see so much value in what they do. And I think that's a gift to the industry in itself, to have individuals like that who are quite passionate about what they're doing. And as well as on the shore side, people that are passionate to help people, that can also change the industry. But it goes without saying again that what is happening right now is real. There is anxiety, depression going around, and post-traumatic stress, and we need to take care of them, because that's the only way that we're going to get them back. And again, when we talk about mental health, it has to erase the stigma. If someone is going through an episode these days and they do recover, can we bring them back? Is that going to be an issue in the future? We've had these discussions before. If someone has had an episode of depression or a mental breakdown, will they be hired again? Will they be given a chance? And maybe that's also a question that we should be asking ourselves now.
Okay, Iris, what do you think with the pandemic? Would it help attract or maybe repel crews from board ships? What do you think?
On the point of view of marine HR, what we saw is that while all the other industries are out or down or closing, hospitality, restaurants, retail in the Philippines, services, professional services, engineering, construction, even legal, they were accounting, they were all taking a hiatus, closing. We kept on because the ships continued to run. That is how essential we are to trade and to movement of goods, essential goods in the world. And the seafarers, while they waited for quite some time until the lockdown eased up, they eventually went on board to replace their colleagues who overextended. And when we managed to take care of the extended contracts, because the ports were allowing crew changes, then we have a semblance of normalcy in the rotation. And for an industry like this, there was a point where they were the only ones supporting the families because everybody else at home have lost their income. I think that is a motivator, and I agree with Gisa. Some of them really just love the jobs that they have. They already enjoy it, not just because they will be able to help the family or that it pays well relatively for our country. It is paying a bit well, better than the others. They also enjoy already the work that they are doing. So for me, I do not see it as a deterrent or something that will discourage them to continue the career. We see still a lot of applicants. We just don't have enough slots to accommodate them. And there's still ongoing interest to have this career, both onshore and, of course, on board.
Okay, and just a quick question. You have a substantial back office industry back in Philippines and in Manila especially. Has this industry been affected by the pandemic? I'm sure there is some sort of...
I was not keeping tabs of the BPO industry actually being so far away from it, but I'm sure they have been because their primary clients are the very industries I was talking about, retail, all these other industries. If the main businesses are getting slower, so is the back office.
But again, as you said, it's a very valid comment that shipping is operating 100%, 100%, not 90%. It's 100% fully operable. Yes, that's an issue. Now, I would like to ask, how about new skills? What are the new skills that the seafarers and maybe those ashore should be investing in after the pandemic? What do you think? What are your views towards that, John?
I think new skills will almost writes itself after this period. I don't see any other skill being required more than, for example, digitalization orientated skills. I think technology will be a big part of our lives and the mariners' lives in the future. I think other aspects like the softer skills, I think captains on board ships will, and crew managers ashore will be much more cognizant of well-being issues. I think there'll be a closer bond, I think, between ship and shore. So all of these kind of communications, cultural sensitivity, type courses to aid people to understand what Gisa said earlier on about the self-awareness. I can see more of that happening in the future. So I think there will be more, of course, the traditional qualifications will still be there, but overlaid with these kind of management soft skills for adapting more to environments on board ship in a technology-driven environment. I think those will be the principles that we will see at a shipboard level. And then, of course, as you come back into the industry itself, there'll be the blockchains and digitalization in terms of commercial shipping. But that's I think a separate subject. It is relevant to this because ultimately the shipping industry provides the personnel to come ashore and support the infrastructure for sure, but just in specifically at the shipboard level, those are the areas that I would see being developed. Technology, computer IT, more technology in the bridge and in the engine room and in cargo work. So that's the area I see happening fairly in the short term and in the near term, I would say.
Yeah, yeah. You didn't mention specifically something, but I'll come back to you. Gisa, what are your thoughts towards that?
Yes, so I wanted to jump off what John said about soft skills. You are right, being able to develop the captains and people on shore, but I would say beyond the captain, it's also giving skills like psychological first aid to the crew, because the captain takes on a lot of things. He is a leader, he's a manager, he's a counselor, he's the doc, he's everything sometimes, or she is everything sometimes.
Correct.
And they take on too many things. And I think it's about time that crew are equipped with skills like psychological first aid so that they can become first responders to each other, so that they don't become dependent on external factors to, oh, I need to call a hotline so that I can talk to somebody. Yes, it's great that they have that right now, but I really think that the future is in empowering the people, and in empowering them teaches them how to respond to one another, and by identifying when someone is in distress, and by giving them that skill and having that in a group, it erases the stigma. It helps someone immediately, whether or not you're sure how to do it. If you have another colleague with you and the three of you have to respond to that person, you can help each other. So there's not a burden on just one person to be able to respond to these situations. So there's psychological first aid, responding to distress or identifying distress on board can be taught to anybody. And health can be also developed systematically. You don't have to expect seafarers to change overnight, but it can be done with a system. And behavior can change. It will take time, but we can influence the larger population.
Sure.
Absolutely. Iris, your views?
I agree with both John and Gisa. John in the digitalization and also these soft skills. I also agree with Gisa to empower our colleagues on board. I also add a bit that with the skills, we have to see we have to be able to see that people on shore and on board have to manage change very well and fast change. This they have to develop as a skill, change management, and without getting unsettled. It's the only way to survive the way it is and the way it will be in the future, I guess. This is happening and will continue to happen. So their ability to manage abrupt changes will be a critical skill going forward.
Absolutely. We've seen several studies about the skills of the 21st century and so on and so forth. I fully agree with all of you. And what John actually, I'm not saying he forgot to mention.
You probably did.
I would just like to say it's cybersecurity with all this digitization and everything. Yep. Cybersecurity is a new requirement in shipping in these days. I'm just saying we add too many, I would say, new tiers of skills that require assurance
Yes.
on board. And despite what many people think, I feel that we will need more people to work with ships and shipping in the future, not less, but more. So this is what we see, because we are adding new layers of skills, and it's I fully agree with what John said about the digitization and the technology and everything, and the soft skills. Everything will be required. So yeah, fully agree, fully agree. Now, my next question is about the training. We've seen the good example of the cloud simulators with Baguilat going on in these days. Baguilat actually acted very, very fast and moved the simulation training to the cloud. And we've seen cloud simulations now in these days, instead of going to a training center with set simulators. And we've seen a lot of Zoom training going on, virtual training. I would like to ask you, what do you think with the trends of this new era with respect to training? What else should we expect to see? And what do you feel about these latest additions, the virtual trainings via Zoom and maybe the cloud simulations? John.
I think that technology has been an extraordinary enabler, and curiously, I had this conversation with a colleague just last week when we were just talking about what happened in the last 12 months in our own club, and this issue of training came up because normally when the claims guys go off for a huddle and have a training session on the latest contract, or the underwriters go off to talk about what happens in the industry in the forward. Now everybody can sit in on those meetings and listen. So even in our own context in the club, we have had far, far more access to training and information and knowledge than we could even have dreamed about, 8 or 9 months ago. So that's just one small example in our operation. And I'm quite certain it is the same for every other P&I club as well. Now, the point is, in the shipboard level, I think similar kinds of developments and opportunities will be opened up. So technology has been an extraordinary enabler and will be clearly it's accelerated this development, to an unimaginable degree, but it will not go away now. It will be a big part of our lives in the future. And simulation and the cost effectiveness of training, and all of the safety aspects that go with training. Now, being able to do it in a socially distanced way, all of this will all come to bear for years to come. So it's now a changed environment, and for those training providers who have adapted, it will be, I think, a great opportunity. For those that haven't adapted and still rely upon people turning up in colleges and in training centers, I think those people will have a difficult time in the very near future, because that model has, I think, run its course for now.
Okay. Gisa?
We're talking about training and changing technology, right? I need time to think. Can Iris go first?
Sure, sure. Can take. For training, what we have seen is what John has specifically said. We have continued to train despite the challenges. We have even these specific trainings are now done remotely, assessment as well. We also saw when it comes to when they are already assessed with their different levels, they have tried to do it remotely through online setup. That has proven to be. There's also an interesting insight from a training center or assessment center. They have seen now that since training is now done remotely, and Marina in our case is in that training classroom for STCW training, they're now able to oversee it remotely. before it was very difficult because they cannot go to each venue, and then they're able to see if the person is actually there or if the person is really fully participating in the training. There are ways already of monitoring. So what she said actually is that maybe the level of competence will even go higher because it was rather very expensive to be sitting in one venue, paying for your fare in Manila, and then paying for your stay. But then if it's now being done remotely from the comforts of your home, they're able to grasp more because there's no expense as well on the other side.
Sure.
And hopefully that will translate to better competence.
Well said.
Okay, Gisa?
Yeah, sorry about that. I felt like it came so fast. So thank you, Iris. But what I was going to say about training right now, as everyone knows, technology, of course, has its benefits, but it also has a mixed medium. We can survive this way right now, but through time, there still has to be a mix of both.
Sure.
That's my stance. So while we are in fact making the most of it in this situation, it's not as sustainable because we are still social beings. And I guess in our experience, like with WellAtSea, we've sent out things like, let's say, psychological first aid on the ships. We've done various sorts of like challenges for them. The benefit there is that we are using technology, but the crew are all together. So there is a social interaction. There's a human aspect to it that is still part of what we're doing, versus making it completely digital.
Yeah.
And I just see that somehow there's still like both have to happen.
Just on that point, Apostolos, I would absolutely agree with Gisa and Iris there. I wouldn't say that physical training in a training center is completely passe, but I think the balance between technology and digital type training environment, I think that will grow at the expense of having physical institutions and training centers in the future. I think they're not mutually exclusive. There is a balance between the two, and that balance I think will shift post pandemic period.
I think with respect to training, and we have to see more with respect to the technology used. For example, if we were using a telephone to do this conference maybe 10 years ago, what we do now is better because we also have uh, our faces in this conference as well, because we have the video and we can see some of the body language, some of the, not the full body language, but some of the body language. Now, at the same time, this is at no cost because we are using internet now instead of telephone lines, meaning we have the technology to do it faster, to do it cheaper, and do it better at the same time. And we have to see more out of the technology because, especially for the trainers, there's a huge disadvantage. They cannot see the body language. It's not, but we can expect that technology will give us something. The same way that I'm saying this is an example for the live events as well. If we, let's say, we're having a live conference, you can feel the buzz within the auditorium. You can see the people. You can interact with them. We don't have the same vibe with this video conferencing, but I'm just saying we can expect that technology will be improved in the future. This is what I'm just saying. This is fairly new for the technology. And if we go back and see, for example, Zoom. Zoom is what people most using in these days. We are using in our own organization, we are using Teams because we have Office 365 and Zoom. But we tend to use Zoom with persons outside of our organization because it's easier for them to use Zoom, and we feel it's more stable, meaning at the end of the day, some of these platforms have to adapt as well, and so on and so forth. But we've seen that technology is there. So I fully agree with what you say, and I fully agree with what Gisa said at the end, because we tend to forget with all these benefits we have, we're making the most out of it, as Gisa correctly said, but we have to expect more. So this is how it is. Now, I would like to go to my last question because we have to wrap up at some point. This is a CAREER4SEA Talk, and I would like to ask you what would be the career advice that you would give to someone who is, let's say, 18, 20 years old, of either seeking a career at sea or seeking a career ashore, or maybe seeking a career at sea and then going his career ashore. So what is your career advice to a young person, to a 18, 20, maybe 16 years old, something like that? John.
I think my advice would be this, that it is a fantastic career. And curiously, Apostolos, I have asked a question many, many times, in fact, probably hundreds, if not thousands of times, in many of the forums that I've participated over the many years I've been on the circuit, asking people, mariners particularly, superintendents, ship managers, if they had the opportunity to do it again, would they do it again? And only one person in all the people I've asked said that he wouldn't do it. He'd rather be a veterinary surgeon ashore. Okay, well that's an unusual one. But everybody else absolutely certain that they would do it all again in a heartbeat, myself included. So a fantastic industry, stimulating industry, engaging industry, challenging industry with great opportunity, but you don't make mistakes. You really have to be careful. You don't want your career to be defined by a collision or a grounding or some other great accident. So it is something that requires respect and engagement, but is hugely, hugely rewarding, both financially, career wise, if you choose to stay and work at it. That would be my advice.
Okay. Gisa?
My advice to anybody, seeking a career at sea or onshore or both, would be to know what motivates you, to always connect with your deepest intention. I know that sounds really cheesy for some, but you have to know why you're doing it. You have to, because things will get challenging, and I've seen that in a lot of our seafarers. And what helps them still is by going back to why they're doing it, what motivates them, what pushes them, what drives them. And if you are very passionate about, meeting people of various cultures, if you like interacting with each person and you find the challenge in the job and you enjoy learning, then it's definitely a career for you. But remember to go back to your intention, the motivation that pushes you forward, and also envisioning a future for yourself. That is also quite helpful.
Okay.
That's it.
Iris?
The conversation I always have with Filipino seafarers, which I handle, is the reason for going to sea. And always it is family. It is always family, foremost. While it is not universally accepted, for me, any purpose, any motivation is good enough. It's motivation. We do not have a cultural judgment of whether it is a good one or a bad one, but that is what drives that person. So we anchor on that for them to be engaged in what they're doing. And at the same time, while we have the demands of skills, technical know-how, it is very important, especially for Filipino seafarers, to learn how to communicate in a multicultural setting and to assert. This is where we are falling short. And this is rather difficult to overcome. Always a question on pathing, why there are very few Filipino seafarers who progress to shore as managers, or who are gaining more and more officer positions. It's the assertion in a non-emotional way. So this is the development from a young age. Our challenge as the Marine HR on how to convert that young Filipino into a very objective way of looking at things while remaining to be engaged, to be assertive without getting emotional. So that is my advice.
Okay, thank you all very much.
Fantastic.
I would like to thank all our viewers. I would like to thank you and trust to see you in one of our future episodes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Apos.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Really
Nice meeting
interesting.
you, John.
Really interesting. Thank you, Bye bye. Bye bye, Gisa.
Thank you.